Cold War was such an interesting time back in the 80s and 90s. That thick-blooded American dude filled with too much grittiness, on the other side the beard fighting for equal status in the society. The proxy wars such as Vietnam War, Latin American conflict, India-Pakistan conflict, Korean War, Vietnam War, everything was supported by these two giant superpowers. The US wanted capitalism and the USSR wanted equal status and equality, which created dictator out of nowhere. But after the collapse of communism, we saw many pop culture rising and US victory, especially in the video games. Today in this video, we are going to look at top 5 NES games which depicted Cold War. But before doing that, do not forget to subscribe cause man, the inflation is rising. We gotta feed our kids, right? So come on man, don't forget to do that. Alright, let's get started. Forget the side-scrolling adventures of Mario and fantastical worlds of Zelda. Russian Attack on the NES throws a gritty Cold War reality. The title itself is a cheeky pun of Russian Attack settling on the tone from get to go. You take control of a lone soldier, a Green Beret in other territories, on a daring mission deep within the enemy lines. The blocky soldiers on a red uniform, an imposing militaristic soundtrack, leaving no doubt who the adversary is. A clear note to the Soviet Union, a dominant geopolitical foe of the Cold War era. Your objectives are ripped straight from the headlines of the tense period. Depending on the version you play, you are either tasked with rescuing prisoners of war, a critical concern during the Cold War with the numerous high-profile cases, or eliminating a secret weapon, a constant fear as both race to develop even more destructive technology. The enemies you face reflect real-world Cold War threats, wielding grenades and assault rifles, the standard weaponry of the time. While Russian Attack is undeniably fast-paced, action-packed shooter, it subtly traps into the anxieties of Cold War era. The omnipresent Red Soldier serves as a constant reminder of ever-present threat. The urgency of your mission rescuing prisoners of war or stopping the devastating weapon mirrors the real-world concerns of the time. Even the limited graphics of the NES managed to convey a sense of gritty realism, with blocky soldiers and stark environments far removed from the colorful worlds of the other NES titles. Russian Attack isn't just a video game, it's a product of its time. It captures the Cold War tensions in a way they are both thrilling and throughout-provoking. Sure, the surface, it's a classic run and gun, or you can say a knife and run shooter, but beneath the explosive 8-bit action lies a reflection of the world of a brick. The game may not have intended to be a historical document, but it served as a reminder of a bygone era, a time when the world teetered on the edge of a nuclear war. Metal Gear on the NES might seem like a simple action on the surface, but it clearly weaves into the themes and anxieties of Cold War era. Outer Heaven, the game's antagonist led by the charismatic Big Boss, reflects a fear of rock states during the Cold War. This breakaway nation, potentially armed with the devastating technology like Walk Tank Metal Gear, mirrors anxieties about countries like North Korea or the potential from the defectors to possess sensitive knowledge. Solid Snake, the game protagonist, isn't a soldier storming a base. He's a lone operative relying on the stealth and gadgets to avoid detection and complete his mission. This gameplay choice echoes the importance of covert operations and intelligence gathering during the Cold War era, while the information and infiltration were crucial tools. Metal Gear itself a walking nuclear weapon, a constant reminder of ever-present threat of a nuclear proliferation that loomed large during the Cold War era. While the game never explicitly mentions nuclear weapons, Metal Gear's destructive powers evokes the same sense of fear and potential for global catastrophe. Metal Gear goes beyond the symbolic references. The game's themes of ideological struggle and potential betrayal resonates with the Cold War's atmosphere of suspicion. Big Boss, a former hero turned into a rogue leader, embodies the fear of defection and blurring lines of loyalty during the time of a political tension. Metal Gear was released in 1987, right in the heart of the Cold War. The anxieties of the era permeate the game, even without explicit Cold War setting or technology. The theme of infiltration, rogue nations, and threat of a mass destruction are deeply rooted in the realities of the time. Metal Gear isn't just about running and gunning, it's a game that asks you to think strategically, avoid detection, and utilize gadgets to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. This focus on stealth and planning reflects the calculated nature of Cold War conflicts. where the victory often hinged on cunning and subterfuge. Metal Gear established itself as a cornerstone of stealth action genre. This focus on infiltration and espionage, inspired by the realities of the Cold War, continues to define a franchise and countless games that followed. Metal Gear is not just about a video game, it's a subtle reflection of Cold War anxieties, from the fear of rogue nations to the ever-present threat of the nuclear war. Through the gameplay and the narrative, Metal Gear offers a unique window to the bygone era where espionage and covert operations were the norm. Ikari Warriors on the surface might seem like a typical run-and-gun NES game. You shoot bad guys, collect power-ups, and progress through the various stages, but beneath this pixelated action lies a subtle reflection of Cold War tensions that crippled the world during the 1980s. While the game never explicitly mentions Soviet Union, the enemy forces are unmistakably resemblance. This constant presence of familiar Cold War foe puts the player on the edge, reinforcing the sense of global conflict. You play as a lone soldier, a common trope in the Cold War media, facing off against the overwhelming odds. This echoes the anxieties of a time where a single event could trigger a devastating escalation between the superpowers. The game throws waves after wave of enemies at you, creating a feeling of being outnumbered and outgunned, mirroring the constant fear of full-blown war. Released in 1986, Ikari Warriors was a product of its era. The Cold War tensions were at peak, and the game tapped into those anxieties. While the graphics and gameplay might seem simplistic today, understanding this historical context adds a depth to the experience. Ikari Warriors isn't just a shoot 'em up, it's a glimpse into the world's Cold War mentality, in a time when the world teetered on the brink of a destruction. Commando, the explosive run-and-gun game on the NES, might seem like a simple mission of rescuing prisoners of war, but beneath the showering bullets and bombastic explosion lies a subtle reflection of a Cold War tensions. The game puts you into the control of a lone soldier, a Green Beret, deep behind the enemy lines. While the location is not explicitly stated, the generic enemy base setting evokes the Cold War anxieties. Rescuing POWs was a major concern during the era, making your mission a direct response to these anxieties. Enemy themselves, clad in green and wielding assault rifles, resemble a Soviet forces. This color association and use of Cold War era weaponry further blur the lines between the fictional game and the real-world conflict. Sure, the narrative is basic, delivered through the mission briefings and sparse cutscenes. However, the context is clear. You're a lone soldier battling a well-armed enemy force, situating in a mirroring the proxy wars and covert operations that define the Cold War. Commando isn't just a strategic war game, but is a constant feeling of being outnumbered and outgunned resonates with the anxieties of facing a larger superpower. Every enemy you eliminate, every prisoner you free, becomes a symbolic victory of its personal Cold War struggle. Wrapped in a 8-bit glory, Commando is not just about blasting your way through the hordes of enemies, it's a subtle reminder of a Cold War constant tension, a fear of powerful adversary, and the solitary courage it took to confront it. Contra on the NES isn't just about run-and-gun shooter, it's a product of a Cold War tensions in the 1980s. While the game takes place on a fictional island nation called Guarbio, the enemies draw clear parallels of the real-world conflict in Nicaragua. The Contra rebels you play could be as a fictionalized version of Contras, the US-backed rebel group fighting against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. The Sandinistas were a leftist movement that US government feared would become a communist stronghold in Central America. The game's enemies, clad red and green fatigues and wielding AK-47, resemble Sandinista soldiers. The use of this real-world Cold War weapon and color blurs the line between the fictional game and the historical conflict. While the narrative is simple, the underlying message resonates. You're a heavily armed soldier battling a well-equipped regime, mirroring the proxy wars and covert operations of a Cold War. The fight against a totalitarian regime, even the fictional island, reflects anxieties about communist expansion during that era. Contra might be more about action than deep storytelling, But the Cold War anxiety simmered between the surface. Every enemy you eliminate, every power-up you collect becomes a symbolical act of defense against the powerful, possibly communist enemy. Contra isn't just a historical simulation of a conflict in Nicaragua, but it captures the essence of Cold War action films and video games. It's a thrilling ride through the fictional conflict, but the echoes of a real-world struggles are undeniable. It's a reminder that the Cold War ideology's battle played out not just in the boardrooms but also in the pixelated jungles of 8-bit video games. These were some few examples of Cold War games in the NES era. Due to the limited hardware resources, it was not easy to tell how it is related to Cold War, but the idea is pretty much resembles the impact of rivalry between these two superpowers. If you found this video interesting, then do check out my podcast in this channel. Thank you so much for watching.